Hello, my name is Pina, and this talk will be about how companies can successfully adopt cloud native technologies in a way that it is sustainable and maximum benefits are ex- extracted from such transformation. So I'm coming from Container Solutions, which is a consulting company helping other businesses to move to cloud native technologies. And our head office is in Amsterdam, but we also have offices mostly in Europe and in Canada. So according to Tolstoy, there are two types of stories. The first one is when man goes on a journey, and the second when a stranger comes to town. So this story will be about the stranger. But before we go to the stranger, before I introduce the stranger, let me show you our main character. And we're going to talk about this company, the company called WealthGrid. It is a middle-sized, pretty successful financial company, about 15 to 20 years old. It's a pretty good place to work at, and it is successful in what it is currently doing. There is some competition, of course, but the market is pretty stable and the business is good. It's also a nice place to work at. And also the people working there, and Janie will be our main character. She's a technical manager, but we'll also meet the CEO and some engineers. So who is our stranger? Who is coming to town? So there are three types of strangers that potentially may enter the market. The first one is somebody like a Starling Bank. Starling Bank is a newcomer. It's a contender bank from UK, and essentially in about 1 year they build an entirely functional bank. And right now, a couple of years later, they have business accounts and they have all kind of other functions. And right now, they are approaching 500,000 customers in UK alone. And there are about 26 banks like that in Europe only. So they are very efficient, very effective. They're not big yet, but they're growing very fast. Amazon just recently acquired a banking license. So no one knows what they're going to do with it, but there are some speculations that they may have 70 million customers, banking customers, in just a couple of years, in US only. And the third type is a traditional bank, somebody like ING from Netherlands, and they're saying that essentially they are not a banking company, they are not a bank building technology or using technology, but they're essentially a technology company that happen to be in banking business. So essentially, if you are WealthGrid, you're doing a pretty good job in building new functionality, but right now it's pretty much linear. So you know that the value that you're building for your customers is growing in more or less linear way. The problem with those newcomers, the strangers, that even if they are not yet in the market, when they will enter, they will be exponential. The growth will be exponential. Imagine Airbnb or Uber or similar companies. And those are companies that were disruptive in traditional industries of hotels or taxis. And once they entered, the speed of change in the market was very dramatic. So why those new strangers, newcomers are so successful? So the main reason is because they deliver faster and more frequently using modern technologies. So basically they can build functionality, quickly deliver it to the market, and very quickly get the feedback, and then based on that feedback deliver even more. And they can do it very, very quickly. So those technologies that they are using, we call them cloud native, public cloud, microservices, containers, Kubernetes, and things like that. Essentially, those technologies and the tools around and the processes around those technologies allow companies to move very fast and deliver functionality every day or even many times a day. So essentially, the thing with those strangers is that even if right now they are tiny and they're only taking tiny portion of your market, and you and your competitors or traditional vendors, they still own majority of the market, and later on when the growth will be significant, those newcomers will start growing exponentially. And at that point, they're still running on pretty low cost because they're new companies and they don't have the baggage of decades of development. They have more or less unlimited funding once they show the growth. On the other hand, traditional company in this case would start cutting cost because it's already running on pretty low margin. And once the margin goes to nothing or even into loss, then the first thing they're going to do is to cut cost, especially on the new development. Essentially, the R&D department is the first to suffer. So it means that if you start late, it may be too late. When you start when the company is already significant and shows significantly, strangers and newcomers are showing significant progress in your market, it might be too late for you to act. So at that point, Jenny, our technical manager, she understands there is a wake-up call, and she understands Wells agreed they must do something. Okay, so the first response is pretty simple. She was on those conferences, she heard those conference talks, and she understands that technology is the main factor in winning this competition. So all those technologies available to everyone, public clouds, Kubernetes, microservices, and the first thing to do is, even without going to managers for approval, together with the technical team, they decide that they need to implement those things. So they start moving to Amazon or Google Cloud, Kubernetes, Docker, microservices, starting adding to the backlog, which is fine. The team is reasonably good and technical, although they used to work with more older technologies. The problem is that 6 to 12 months later, or sometimes even 2 years later, they realize that every time they need to work on something, there is always higher priority feature that is coming from the market. So there is always pressure from customers and features always winning. So it means that after 6 to 12 months or 24 months, they realize that only tiny portion of the new technologies are implemented. And there is no significant impact on current production environments. So maybe some tiny microservices running on some Kubernetes cluster on the side. Okay, fine. So at that point, Jenny decides that they must do something else. It doesn't work and it doesn't lead them fast enough to the goal of successfully competing with the newcomers. So at that point, she prepared a very significant plan with technology goals, with building a new platform, adapting new technologies, building everything like it's supposed to be. She goes with this plan and with the deadlines and specific deliverables to the CEO, and she gets the approval. Because CEO obviously understands that to survive in this market, they must do something. So they divide the team into a legacy platform with slower delivery, because obviously they have less people, and a new cloud native team that is responsible to build the platform. They're separate backlogs, separate deliverables, and the general idea is that once the new platform is running, then they can so quickly deliver the functionality that they will very quickly pay back the delay in deliverables. An idea that it would take typically 6 to 8 months to 9 months, something like that. So this is typically the promise to the business. The problem is 6 to 12 months later, the progress is not as expected. There is maybe only 30% delivered. It's not even close to production. And there is more and more pressure coming from the business with support of executive team that they have to deliver those functionalities to the market. Because otherwise, they will very quickly will start losing their customers. Customers have to have their new functionality and increased quality. And of course, it's not being delivered because a significant portion of the team was moved to the new platform. Okay, so why is it so difficult? The answer is because cloud native is new, complex, and requires new ways of thinking. What does it mean? So first, what is actually cloud native? And one of the definitions is by CNCF, Cloud Native Compute Foundation, and generally it's about microservices, containers, and dynamic orchestration, and very explicitly to build great products faster, not the massive scale, which is also important, but specifically focusing on fast delivery, or fast time to market. So if we see this progression of or adoption of these technologies, in the beginning it's pretty simple actually. So again, those engineers, they go to the conferences, they see Kelsey Hightower or somebody doing magic on the stage and producing results very quickly and efficiently. And then they try it on one container or very tiny application with maybe few containers running Java. It's actually pretty simple, can be done in just few hours. And at that point, they go to the manager and say, we have to adopt it. It's excellent. We love it. And it's actually so easy that we can do it without any significant investment. They get the approval, but the problem is that it explodes. The complexity of this environment is actually dramatically different when you start getting closer to large-scale production environment. And at some point you realize that, actually not what I meant. And the reason for that is, this is one of the reasons, which is, this is again coming from CNCF. It's called CNCF Landscape. There is apparently more than 600 projects currently monitored by CNCF. And they represent cloud native ecosystem, landscape. You don't have to know all of them, but you need to understand how more or less they work. And probably every week they are adding a couple of new projects. So to understand the complexity and how all those tools fit together, how they integrate between themselves and how they integrate with older systems, and what kind of processes and delivery processes you need to use to be successful with this, is actually requires a lot of new knowledge. So back to our company, back to WellsGrid. So at this point, the executive team and the sales team, they have so much pressure coming from the market that they start losing patience. And at some point, the CEO tells to Jenny, you know what? We had enough. You promised certain deliverables within 6 months. It didn't happen. You don't even know what's going to happen in the next 6 months. We really, really have to do it. So I still trust you to finish this platform, but we have these 5 features. We have this amount of things that we must deliver within the next 3 months. And at that point, Jenny realizes that actually there is no practical way to deliver them based on new platform, because new platform is not ready and no one really knows when it's going to be ready. So they have to do something else. Okay, let's take a bit of break with the WellsGrid story and take a bit of a detour into some tools. I will introduce some tools that will help us to solve Janie's WellsGrid problem. So the first tool is the difference between creativity and proficiency. So this thing is called knowledge funnel. the general idea is that for every new idea, there are three major stages. The first one is mystery. So you have an idea, you have no real understanding what's going to happen. You don't understand if it's going to be a good idea, bad idea, how to implement it. Imagine McDonald's, whatever it started in 1950s, the first restaurant. The main difference was that it was drive in through restaurant instead of driving. So instead of parking outside of the restaurant and approaching it, you would actually drive or walk to the counter, and they would prepare the food much faster, so it will be warmer and better. So no one really knew if it's a good idea or not. So they opened the first restaurant, and it was actually pretty successful. At that point, the McDonald's brothers, they thought, great idea, let's expand. So they got up to 4 restaurants. And then every time they tried to expand again, they hired new managers, but the quality actually didn't go the right direction. And they didn't understand how to grow beyond just few restaurants. They sort of knew that they had to be fast and high quality, but they didn't know how to scale. So at that point, there was another guy called Ray Kroc. Eventually, he took over McDonald's. He bought it from McDonald's brothers. If you saw the movie, you will know the story. He made McDonald's what it is today, which is fully algorithmic. It's basically, there is a book, you open a new restaurant, there's every step is well defined and it's very clear. It's all about quality and speed. So the beginning is creative side. When the creative side is when you have an idea and you need to develop it, and you have plenty of ideas, and most of them are probably not very good. So startup is by nature is in this state. Just by building a new thing, by definition, you don't know if it's going to succeed or not. And as you build up the company and you get to more enterprise and successful business, and you become more proficient and more, basically you improve the idea until it becomes a viable business. And the way to work in each one of those sections is different. In the beginning, you want to use research, design thinking, and all kind of creative ways of doing things. Then you become more agile to change direction about and ability to pivot quickly or rewrite pieces of your idea or rebuild pieces of your product. And at some point, when you go more to algorithmic stage and you build bureaucracy and you tend to be more waterfall or lean, more like Toyota system. So the difference is in the beginning you have an idea that you need to explore, and at the end you have a successful product that you need to improve the quality and make it cheap to deliver. So unfortunately, when the enterprise becomes fully proficient and algorithmic, they sometimes, or many times, or most of the time, they forget how to be startup, how to go back into mystery state and research new ideas or introduce new ideas to their business. So they basically, like McDonald's, they just continue improving over and over again the same product. The thing is that the structure of the company is changing over time, from just a bunch of people doing weird things through small teams all the way to strong hierarchy and bureaucracy. But the thing is also that only when you get to the algorithmic stage and full proficiency, only then you can produce significant revenue. So the mystery state may bring a bit of money, but it's not something that you can grow with. So the main idea is that you must have both. To have a successful business, you need to go through a mystery state, through heuristics, and then switch to proficiency and improvements. But what is important to understand is that actually proficiency and creativity teams need to be managed in different ways. So this is a metaphor coming from a book about the different cultures. And the metaphor is talking about ice and water. So basically, you cannot have both ice and water in the same place. So if you go above 0 degrees, then it becomes water, and below it's ice. But the argument says is that actually somewhere around the phase transition, somewhere around 0 degrees, you can have both. Not exactly both in the same time, but sort of pockets of ice and pockets of water in the same time. What it means is that you cannot really have teams that are both proficient and creative. So you need to manage them differently. The proficient teams require high repetition. So you need to deliver the same thing over and over again, the best quality you can, at the best quality you possibly can. So it requires high repetition, high feedback, very small set of very clear rules, and the emphasis on skills and the repetition. On the other hand, the creativity requires purpose, which means more of a goal but not specific list of tasks. It requires strong support and safety, mainly it requires autonomy. So you create a goal, a purpose, and then you let the team to get there in whatever way they possibly can. It's very important to exchange the technology. So the proficient teams need to tell the creative teams what are the actual problems in the market, and the creative teams need to get something out of their development pipeline, something practical that the proficient teams can use in the real life with customers. So that's why it's very important to have this, according to McKinsey, this is 3 horizons model. So you need to spread your investment into development of new products according to 3 horizons. The delivery one, which is immediate development of the products that you are selling right now. Innovation is introducing new technologies and new ideas into existing products or changing the existing products. And research is about something long-term, just learning what's going on. So something that you may need to use in a few years. And it's important to have people called champions that can understand those different horizons and move the technology across those 3 horizons. So normally you would want to invest something like 70-80% into current delivery, maybe 15-25% into innovation, and still keep a bit of time for the research. But this is potentially one of the companies, and I would ask you as an audience, how would you call it? Or how would you call this company? Or how would you call this one? But since it's a recording, I'll just give you the answers. The second one is enterprise. So too many enterprises only focusing on delivery. 95 or even 100% is only about products that are selling right now. The second one is a startup. By nature, startup is an innovation company, innovation type of company. And they may do some research and may do some delivery, but the main focus is taking some idea and building a proper product from it. There are also universities that spend 100% of their time on research, which is very important because no one else is investing enough in the research that is not immediately monetizable. So, tool number 2. The tool number 2 is patterns. The patterns idea is coming from a person called Christopher Alexander, and he wrote a series of books with specifically those 3 that they are talking about. They are all about actual architecture, so physical buildings, nothing to do with software. And he wrote these books between 70, and he started writing the first book in 70s of 1970s. So in patterns, there are 3 main ideas: the patterns, languages, and designs. The pattern itself is sort of a word, like table, chair, and sofa. So table, when I say table, you sort of know what it means, but also there are many different ways to implement a table. So when I speak to somebody about the table, you understand what I mean, but also you have a lot of freedom to implement a variety of different tables. And the same with chair, sofa, or anything else. The second thing is a language. Language is all the words within specific domain. For example, furniture language would include all the words related to furniture, so all the patterns related to the furniture. And the third concept is designs. Designs are essentially stories that you can tell use patterns. For example, there's a square table with 4 chairs and a sofa in the room. This is sort of clear, so there is a general idea what's going on in that room, but it's also pretty vague, so you have a lot of options to implement it in different ways. So the main idea of the patterns is that we create a common language that we can start talking to each other. Once we agree on terms, on words, on patterns, then we can start build sentences or designs to solve our problems in a more consistent way. Otherwise, if we don't have an agreement what table is, every time I talk to somebody, I need to explain what a table is, and that's just too much effort. So this is an example of a typical pattern. This pattern is called vision first. There are 4 major elements in each pattern. The first one is the context. The context in this pattern is company is moving to cloud native and looking to basically create a list of specific actions for execution. And in this context, they potentially have a problem. And the problem is that if you don't have significant experience in this field, then when people don't have the experience and knowledge, they tend to basically fall back to well-known ways. What it means is that they will use the existing tools and technologies and techniques and processes which may not be the best fit for the cloud native transformation, just because that's what they know. And the solution is to create and visualize the architecture of the entire system up front, so the people going through the transformation will have a clear goal and will understand what's going to happen. And then consequently, we have a new context, which is all the teams have guiding principle for implementation phase. So it adds clarity and clear direction. And in the beginning, we have a short summary, which is very important. Almost each word here is very important. So defining guiding vision as a very first step helps to set the right path through an uncertain environment. So it's very explicitly said that certain environment, because if you know what you're doing and all the technologies are known, you don't really need that. You can behave in a different way. You can create a clear plan rather than vision. You can define exactly what you're going to do. So this is an example of a pattern, and each pattern has a diagram. In our cloud native pattern language, right now we have about 90 patterns, and some of them should be pretty simple to understand, like honest feedback or business case. You have no business case, you have no need to go through a difficult cloud native transformation. But there are also MVPs and experiments and all kind of different other things. Some of them are technical, some of them are architectural, and some of them are more organizational and business oriented. So after patterns, the third tool is cognitive biases. I'm only going to mention it very briefly. Basically, there is this book, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who get a Nobel Prize for essentially invention of behavioral economics. He with his collaborator, they introduced this idea of cognitive biases. And the general idea of the book is that there are 2 systems. System 1, which is fast but intuitive, right? And system 2 is deliberate but slow. It means that most of our decisions we make based on sort of hunches, sort of embedded in our brain heuristics that we don't fully understand how they work. Most of the time they work very well. Some of the times they don't work very well because they're too fast to actually understand the situation. And they're consistently problematic in certain scenarios. On the other hand, we can switch to the system 2, which is more deliberate and logical, and then we can really understand the proper benefits of each of the actions. So cognitive biases are essentially the mistakes system 1 will do consistently. One example is ostrich effect. That's where the ostrich sticks its head, at least that's what we think it does, in the sand to ignore the surrounding environment. The other very strong one that we see in cloud native transformation, or essentially any introduction of new ideas, is status quo bias. People really want to preserve the status quo, and they resist almost automatically any new change. Another very interesting bias is confirmation bias. That's where you have an idea, you think you have a solution, and then you will evaluate all the options, but basically not really. You will only look for confirmation of your solution. You will only look for facts that confirm that your idea is or your solution is correct, and you will ignore everything else. And there are many other biases which we're not going to into too much detail with. Okay, so going back to Wells Grid and our main story. What happened so far? So if we see on this, this is a scale of 0 to 100% between creativity and proficiency. And essentially it's how much effort you assign to creative endeavor and proficient. And in the beginning, like I showed in typical enterprise, 95 or more % of the effort is in the proficiency. Now, at that point, Janie and the team essentially put the cloud native technologies and tools, which is an innovative and creative attempt or job. They put it in just proficient backlog. They put it in a Scrum backlog, and they started executing it using just the same type of processes without any significant changes. Also, same type of management by deadlines, by stress, by using sprints. I mean, when you have sprints in Scrum, the main purpose of a sprint is like in running, right? It's to run as fast as you can. And you have a clear deadline every week or every 2 weeks. When you run as fast as you cannot possibly look around you and be creative. You cannot be predictably creative. So this didn't work. The second attempt was to totally reverse it and basically say we will allocate majority or significant portion of resources to full rewrite, to fully creative mode. And although a lot of resources were allocated, resources meaning mostly people, allocated to this initiative, still the processes and the culture were based on previous knowledge. So there was no adoption of new ways of doing, no design thinking, no purpose setting, but more still consistently Scrum and Waterfall approach to build this full rewrite. The problem is that cloud native is a new way of doing things, which is not predictable because to the people that don't understand what's going on, right? And most of the people in Wells Grid, they had none of the people in Wells Grid had any experience with cloud native. So let's try to design the transformation for Wells Grid, and we're going to use cloud native pattern language. So each one of these cards is a pattern. So imagine like Vision Force, there was a full pattern defined somewhere. I'm not going to present each pattern in such details, but there is somewhere a full definition of each one of those cards. And the way you start typically is with a transformation champion, is a person who can lead the transformation and understands the how to do it right. The second one, you really need a business case, and you need and after you have a business case, you need executive commitment. Without that, it's not going to happen because the initiative is big and has very large costs. Then you define a vision first and create a core team, which is a reasonably small team that will drive the innovation and will be managed in innovation ways. Right? Then you define the transformation strategy, And then you split the teams into essentially the core team becomes a creative team managed with purpose and basically freedom to experiment. And then you manage the rest of the teams. You basically keep the rest of the teams building the value in existing ways until the new platform is ready. Then the core team, the creative team, is going into more creative research, exploratory experiments, building POCs. They are adopt new ways of doing things like distributed systems. And eventually, in about 3, 4, 5 months, they can achieve an MVP, a minimum viable product, essentially a system that is ready to production, but it is very, very simple. It only has very basic functionality. They prepare it for production, and then in parallel, the proficient teams, the teams that are working on the legacy products, they continue delivering the value for the customers in existing ways, but they also prepare for onboarding. So they go through trainings, they go to all kind of educational processes, essentially. And then the teams working on legacy software are gradually onboarded to the new platform. Gradually is basically every time there are 2 or 3 teams, because otherwise, if too many teams are onboarded to new platform, it will overwhelm the creative teams, and they will have to switch to support mode that may basically stop all innovation. And at some point, when the majority of the teams are onboarded, they continue the ongoing activities of strangling the old monoliths, and potentially at the end, very important at the end, do some lift and shift of remaining applications that are not changing very much, and maybe they have some needs to shut down all data centers. On the other hand, the creative teams continue working on the next, second, and third horizons and on innovation. So very important on the top, you see the percentages of investment into delivery, innovation, and research. And if in the beginning we start with 95% on delivery, as we go, we can play with this and we can allocate more people to innovation and then more people to research as long as it's needed, but then scale back the innovation activities and go back to more delivery, more improving the quality and delivering new functionality faster. It's very important still to keep significant investment, ongoing investment in future horizons. Each one of those patterns can be expanded in more. Right? For example, what is distributed systems? It's very important that they include CI, CD, observability, microservices, and all kind of other things. Another example is gradual onboarding. There are all kind of patterns to explain how to actually do gradual onboarding. And another one is 3 horizons. And in 3 horizons, it's important to continue working on things like maybe adapting serverless, maybe building A/B testing, introducing all kind of new things that will continuously improve the future of the products. Another section of patterns is very, very important. Those are cultural patterns. And as Daniel Coyle said in Cultural Code, that essentially culture is not something you are. It's not something vague and undefined. It's something you do every day. It's essentially all the actions, all the daily routines of all the people in the company. That's why it's very important to behave in a certain way on a daily basis, in a way that will support the transition to cloud native. And there are many patterns here that are more targeting this kind of cultural change. For example, honest feedback or blameless inquiry or psychological safety. So if we continue those first 2 attempts, essentially, first 2 Genius attempts, in the first one, there was not enough investment into new platform. In the second one, there was too much investment in the new platform, but the process and the culture didn't change to support that. And in the third section, basically the team moved based to more balanced approach when some portion of the team went to build the MVP and build the new cloud native platform, while the remaining parts of the team kept building the functionality customers needed. And then gradually more and more investment, or potentially you can play with this kind of, with this balance. It's under your control. For example, you can decide to invest in big refactoring or build a new product, and then you can put significant portion of your team on more creative or innovative tasks. But you need to understand that then those people need to be managed in a different way, and they need to have more autonomy to create new things. And it is very important that you will always have this balance of 3 horizons. Yes, there is delivery, but you need to have continuous research. And research, those are new technologies. They may fit, they may not fit. You need to understand how they work. And some of them may go down to the basket, but maybe you will maybe a couple of years from now, you will need them once they become more stable or more relevant for your business. Some of the research topics will go into innovation. So basically innovation, that's where you take new technologies and you use them to significantly improve your existing products. And still, majority of the work is going into existing delivery. So it's very important that yes, there is always pressure to deliver more features, more functionality. Customers need more of everything, and there are always plenty of new ideas. But it's also very important to continuously feed the delivery backlog with innovation, and innovation backlog with research topics. So the stranger is coming. There is no argument about that. The Starling Bank is already there, already very successful. The question is not if they're coming, but when they're going to be big and important, when they're going to affect your business that much that you cannot survive anymore. And the question is, are you ready? Are you doing everything you have to do to be able to compete them using the same technologies, the same speed of delivery, and the same creativity as they do? All this will be written or based on the book that we are writing right now, and will be released later this year, in a book called Cloud Native Survival Kit. And yeah, you're very welcome to buy the book when it's out. And thank you. You can contact me for questions or comments, and that's it. Thank you.